Hello, I'm James Maguire of Maguire Family Law, and we are rolling out a series of videos following some research, a survey that we've undertaken in August 2024 about coercive control and really how that affects people, both from a family law perspective and a criminal law perspective. So with me as well, I've got Cecilia Goodwin, who is a specialist criminal lawyer. So we're going to have a discussion about this, more specifically in this video to look at where people can get help. And as part of the survey, interestingly, the 2,000 people that filled in the questionnaires and were spoken to, 49% felt that they really wouldn't get the help that they needed or wouldn't know where to go to get the help. So there is certainly help available to people from a criminal law perspective via the police, but certainly from the family courts as well. And there is quite a lot of crossover in terms of the type of work.
Yeah.
But Cecilia, I'd be interested to know, again, from your perspective about where you see people being able to get help from the police, or maybe where people are accused of it. And there's always the fear and the risk that you could be falsely accused, but getting help from someone like yourself.
So I think from my perspective, in terms of the work that I do, I tend to represent people who have been accused of perpetrating some of these behaviors. And it can be very difficult because sometimes you don't expect it and it can just come from nowhere in your mind if you are somebody who's been accused. So I think help-wise, it is quite difficult. But what I would say is if you have been accused of coercive controlling behavior, very, very, very important that you seek legal advice, because these sorts of things, these sorts of offences, any offence really, can snowball and can easily just get out of control. So what you want to make sure that you're doing is you are getting the right advice, you are seeking legal advice, and not going into interviews saying, I've done nothing wrong, I'm just going to say my side of things. Which, yes, there is a time and place for doing that. But I think what you need to make sure you're doing is that you are properly advised before you're getting into any interview situations in this respect. I mean, the other side of it, of course, is I do wish there was some sort of organizations, and I don't know, maybe they are out there and I just don't know of them, where people who have been accused and are still going through the process of the criminal justice system can get some sort of support in relation to what they're also going through. Because it's very, very geared, of course, and I can see why, at people who are saying that they have been, victims of this. But we all know that there's two sides to a story. And sometimes you find, especially when I'm speaking to clients sometimes, that sometimes they are wrongly accused, or it's a two-way situation where they're saying, well, actually, that person did this, that person did that. So it's quite a difficult situation that there's not much help at this stage for people who are facing those sorts of allegations.
But turning that around, but from the victims, because there will be victims of it. And
Yeah.
we can see from previous videos and some of the statistics that there are a lot more of these offences being
Yeah.
reported to the police. And certainly in my everyday work as a family law practitioner, it's a feature in quite a lot of cases. And in the first video we did, the survey reported back that 1 in 5 people, on an anonymous basis, felt that they were in a coercive and controlling relationship. But I think for a lot of the victims, and going back to the introduction to this video, feel that they won't really get the help and the support that they want. And I was just interested from your perspective about the police's appetite to actually look at these offences seriously and to investigate them.
Well, I think actually, I would say the police are doing a good job. They are trying, and it's on the against a backdrop of cuts to their services and what they can do. But also, when people are in coercive situations, sometimes they don't want to give statements. That makes the whole investigation part even more difficult. But what I would say is if anybody is in or finds themselves in those sorts of situations, if you have the strength, report it. Because without reporting, you don't know whether it might get worse and it might end up being too late. But I would say always report it. And then you've done your part, you've reported it. It's then for the police to then decide what they can, if there's sufficient evidence or not. But I think in most of the cases that I've come across where there has been allegations of coercive control, police have investigated.
Okay. I mean, again, that statistic of 49% of people don't feel they will get the help and support, don't know where to get it. But I would also say that from a family perspective, they should always seek their own independent legal advice from someone like me or similar. The courts have a variety of protective powers. An injunction order, what we call a non-molestation order, to protect people from violence or the threat of violence, intimidation, harassment, etc. Sometimes an occupation order can remove someone from the property if the other person or the children are at risk of harm. Okay, and it can exclude them, create an exclusion zone as well. If they're already gone, that they're not allowed to re-enter the property or approach it within 50 meters. Or whatever. So the powers are there, and they're very serious orders because often they'll come attached with what's called a penal notice. So breach of it will be a contempt of court, so that risk of, from a civil perspective, being sent to prison or fined or both. Where there's children as well, the courts can make what's called a prohibited steps order. So it could actually prohibit the other parent from seeing the children at that stage, or removing them from the family home or their school, or sometimes this country, because there's a lot of child abduction that happens as well. So there is the powers, where from a criminal perspective or the family, it's just perhaps an awareness. And I don't know from again your perspective whether you feel that there's a need for training, specialist training, from lawyers or the courts about this.
I definitely do. I think it's about awareness and it's about education, and I think that is a key in respect of dealing with this legislation. I say that, for example, there are behaviors that occur in our daily lives. Not all of them are going to be akin or result in an investigation for coercive controlling behavior. So it's about understanding what those behaviors are, understanding the circumstances in which they can become a criminal offense. But I think we need to start educating people from a younger age. I think it should be taught in schools because school age children are going to be in relationships, whether, it's boyfriend and girlfriend or whatever it may be. Or sometimes, they need to know whether or not their behavior is behavior that is acceptable. And I think that's the key. Educating children in relation to what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. The majority know because they have, good examples of that, whether it's at home or whatever. But I think when we look at cases where young people have ended up in situations where they've caused, in this case, which is quite horrible, the Holly Newton case, where, we ended up with a death. I mean, that was obviously dealt with in the criminal courts in respect of the offences that, are there for that type of behaviour, that crime.
And that just shows as well that it's not just adults,
No,
it's children.
And it was the lead up to it. And when you look at the facts and you look at the things that were said in that case about the behaviours, that would have been coercive controlling if it was an adult.
Yeah. And I know the family are campaigning about that. And it just shows that it does start at a younger age, and the need for education. And I suppose in terms of the legal world that we operate, I certainly see that there is a need for lawyers to be more aware, sensitive to this.
Absolutely.
Whether you're potentially consulted by the victim or the accused. But I'd also say before the courts, because I can't help but feel that sometimes the wrongdoer, if you like, and sometimes it could be subtle, but they're given the benefit of the doubt. They don't comply with an order. We'll let them comply again. They still haven't complied with an order. We'll let them, and that just extends the proceedings. It puts the victim, if you like, to extra cost, delay, uncertainty. They'll lack confidence in the system. And I do think there needs to be unaware of that. And even if you reach an agreement,
Yeah.
then, commonly the abuser will still not comply with the order. They'll not pay the maintenance, or they won't return the children at the right time.
Yeah.
And that's just, again, sort of weaponizing the proceedings, using it, and just trying to get to the victim in a different way. And I certainly think the lawyers and the courts need to have their eyes open to that, rather than just sleepwalking into problems.
But I think it's lawyers as well, I guess, in that circumstance. And you would also, put into the mix judges as well, in terms of training to be able to spot these behaviors, and when they are faced with a case, be able to actually understand the ramifications of it, especially on the family, or the complainant. But one thing I do wonder as well when we talk about education is, so we've spoken about young people needing to be educated about this, but maybe there's also something to do with cultural norms or a generational issue. Like these sorts of things that we're seeing now under this legislation, a few generations ago, they just did not exist. So maybe it's about also understanding that it could also be to do with where people are in terms of their understanding and their norms in terms of how they've been raised or the climate that they've grown up in. So it's interesting, but
Yeah. Okay. Well, we see. I mean, certainly, it's extremely sad in terms of the Holly Newton case, but it does create that conversation and awareness. And we can see from some of the statistics that more and more of these the types of behaviours are coming before the family courts and also the criminal courts. And yeah, certainly, there is help available to people, and there is the need for training, and for us to be a lot more sophisticated in terms of, how we can protect people, and, from your perspective, no doubt, how to defend people,
yeah,
because,
absolutely.
there is sometimes a concern about trivializing these behaviors. And just because someone says something that someone doesn't like doesn't mean that they're coercive and controlling or a narcissist. It might be,
Yeah,
but as you said before, I think, there are always two sides to a story.
absolutely. No.
Okay. Thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you for having me.